Ask most people to name royal family homes, and the answers are always the same. Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, maybe Kensington Palace if they follow royal news. To most people, the British monarchy seems to live in just a handful of famous buildings that appear on postcards and television screens. That image feels manageable and harmless, but it is also deeply incomplete. In reality, the House of Windsor controls more than 30 residential properties across Britain. These are not just ceremonial buildings. They are castles, mansions, country houses, shooting estates, and private retreats spread across hundreds of thousands of acres. Together, they are worth billions of pounds. Most of them are never shown to the public. Many are barely mentioned, and some exist in a confusing space where public money, private ownership, and royal privilege overlap in ways that are hard to understand. These properties are real, the legal structures are real, and the secrecy is real. The reason this matters is simple. Britain is facing a severe housing crisis. Millions struggle to afford rent or buy a home, while one family quietly controls more residential property than some small towns. The monarchy presents itself as symbolic, modest, and modern, but its property system belongs to a much older world. Over centuries, land was gathered through royal power, inheritance, and political authority. Today, that land still exists, protected by tradition and complicated accounting. Officially, some properties belong to the Crown Estate, some to private duchies, and others to the monarch personally. In practice, the boundaries between public and private money are often blurred. The Crown Estate is said to belong to the nation, yet its properties are leased privately to royals under undisclosed terms. The duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall are called private estates, yet they exist only because of hereditary royal position and enjoy tax advantages unavailable to ordinary citizens. When people hear that the monarchy pays for itself, they usually mean the sovereign grant, a publicly reported figure. But that number shows only part of the picture. Security costs, private property maintenance, staff salaries, and tax exemptions sit outside public view. The true cost of maintaining a royal lifestyle across dozens of properties cannot be calculated because the information is not released. This system survives because it is rarely seen as a whole. Each property is discussed separately, framed as tradition, history, or personal preference. But when viewed together, the scale becomes uncomfortable. It forces a question modern Britain struggles to answer. Why does one family still need an empire of homes in a country where home ownership is becoming impossible for many? Sandringham House is the perfect example of how royal property is presented versus how it actually functions. Every Christmas, the public sees carefully chosen images of the royal family walking to church, smiling, waving, and appearing like any other family, enjoying the holidays. What the camera never shows is the full scale of what surrounds them. Sandringham is a privately owned estate of around 20,000 acres in Norfolk. It was purchased in 1862 and is now worth at least £200 million, likely far more. The main house alone has around 270 rooms, and the estate includes multiple additional residences, farms, and shooting grounds. Officially, Sandringham is not public property, which means it does not appear in Crown Estate accounts. Yet maintaining such an estate requires constant funding. Land management, building repairs, staff salaries, and security during royal visits cost millions every year. Much of this is paid through the Duchy of Lancaster, which is described as private income for the monarch, but exists because of royal status and benefits from special tax treatment. Only small parts of Sandringham are open to the public, and only at certain times of the year. The usual explanation is privacy and security. That explanation sounds reasonable until it is compared with other historic estates, many of which allow far more access while their owners still live there. Full access would reveal the true scale of the estate and make the image of a modest family Christmas harder to maintain. Balmoral Castle in Scotland takes this pattern even further. Balmoral is a 50,000-acre estate purchased by Queen Victoria in the 19th century. It is larger than many British cities and worth over £1 billion. The castle and its surrounding land function as a private domain for the royal family during summer months. While a small part opens to visitors when the family is away, the estate is closed and tightly controlled during royal stays. Maintaining Balmoral requires dozens of full-time staff and significant annual costs, yet detailed financial accounts are never published. Balmoral is often described as a private retreat where the monarch can escape public life. That is true, but it is also political. The estate represents royal presence in Scotland and plays a symbolic role in maintaining the union. Its privacy is not just about relaxation. It is about control, image, and avoiding scrutiny. A £1 billion estate used for a few weeks each year is difficult to justify openly, especially while debates about inequality and land ownership grow louder. Keeping Balmoral partially hidden keeps those debates abstract rather than real. The most controversial examples of royal property are not the famous palaces, but the lesser-known residences tied to individual family members. Prince Andrew's occupation of Royal Lodge is one of the clearest cases. Royal Lodge is a 30-room mansion set within Windsor Great Park. It is Crown Estate property, meaning it technically belongs to the nation. Andrew secured a 75-year lease in 2003 for a reported rent of around £250 per week, an amount far below market value. In exchange, he agreed to cover maintenance and renovations, which reportedly cost millions. Where that money came from has never been clearly explained. Despite Andrew's removal from royal duties and public disgrace, he remains in the property, protected by a legally solid lease. The king cannot easily remove him without causing legal and political problems. This situation highlights how royal privilege operates quietly through contracts the public never sees. Other family members benefit from similar arrangements. Prince Edward lives in a 57-room mansion leased from the Crown Estate under confidential terms. Princess Anne lives on a large working farm purchased with duchy funds and passed to her without inheritance tax. These arrangements are legal, but legality does not equal fairness. The duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall generate tens of millions each year and are exempt from certain taxes. They fund private renovations, staff, and lifestyles while being rooted in public office. Inheritance is another key issue. Ordinary Britons pay up to 40% inheritance tax. Royal estates, including private properties like Sandringham and Balmoral, pass between monarchs tax-free under special agreements. This allows wealth to grow across generations, untouched. When all of this is added together, undisclosed security costs, private estates with public roots, tax exemptions, and confidential leases, the true cost of the monarchy becomes impossible to calculate. Estimates range from hundreds of millions to over £500 million annually. The exact number is unknowable by design. Transparency would force uncomfortable choices. If full property costs were published, pressure to sell, consolidate, or reduce would be intense. The monarchy survives by keeping each property separate in the public imagination, never allowing the full picture to come into focus. But that strategy is becoming harder to maintain. As housing becomes less affordable and public services struggle, the contrast grows sharper. The monarchy's property empire is not hidden because each building is scandalous on its own. It is hidden because together they reveal a system of inherited privilege that no longer fits modern Britain. That is the real reason these mansions remain out of sight. Because once people see the whole system clearly, they begin to ask not whether the monarchy is traditional, but whether it is still justified at all. When all these royal properties are viewed together, a pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Individually, each home has a story that sounds reasonable. Sandringham is tradition, Balmoral is heritage, Windsor is a working residence, Highgrove is environmental passion, Anmer Hall is family privacy, Royal Lodge is a legal contract. Each explanation on its own feels acceptable. But when these properties are seen as a single system, the scale becomes overwhelming. One family does not simply own a few historic buildings. It controls a nationwide network of estates, mansions, farms, castles, and private retreats that stretch across England and Scotland. This is not about comfort or security. It is about accumulation. The monarchy exists in a modern democracy, yet its property system belongs to a feudal past. Land and wealth passed down not through open markets or labor, but through birthright, protected by law and tradition. This contradiction sits at the heart of Britain's unease with its monarchy. People may accept ceremony, symbolism, and even public funding for national institutions. What becomes harder to accept is vast private privilege hidden behind public language. The royal family often insists that most of its properties are either private or belong to the crown, not to individuals. But for ordinary citizens, this distinction changes very little. Whether a palace is technically owned by the monarch personally or held in right of the crown, it still serves the same family, passed from one generation to the next, untouched by inheritance tax, protected from market forces, and maintained by wealth rooted in public authority. That is why transparency is such a threat. If every property were listed clearly, if every maintenance cost were published, if every lease arrangement were explained, the monarchy would be forced to justify something it has never had to justify before. Scale. Why so many homes? Why so much land? Why so much privacy in a country where public accountability is expected from every other institution? This is where the idea of a slimmed-down monarchy begins to collapse under its own weight. Over the past decade, royal officials have repeatedly promised modernization. Fewer working royals, lower costs, greater efficiency. On paper, this sounds like reform. In practice, very little has changed where it matters most. Ceremonial roles may have been reduced, but property holdings have not. The same estates remain in royal hands. The same private arrangements continue. The same secrecy protects the same privileges. King Charles speaks openly about sustainability, climate change, and social responsibility. Prince William speaks passionately about homelessness and mental health. These causes are real, and their advocacy is often sincere. But the contradiction remains. It is difficult to campaign against homelessness while controlling access to dozens of homes. It is difficult to speak about social fairness while benefiting from tax exemptions and inherited land on a scale no ordinary citizen could ever access. This is not about personal morality. It is about structural imbalance. The monarchy asks the public to see it as symbolic rather than powerful. Yet property is power. Land is power. Control over space, privacy, and resources is one of the oldest forms of authority. Even today, land ownership shapes wealth more than almost any other factor. The royal family sits at the top of that system, not because of innovation or enterprise, but because history placed them there and law keeps them there. The housing crisis sharpens this contradiction every year. Young people are locked out of home ownership. Rent consumes enormous portions of income. Social housing waiting lists stretch into decades. Entire communities struggle to remain affordable. In this context, the image of one family controlling more than 30 residences becomes increasingly difficult to defend. The monarchy relies on emotional connection to survive. Pageantry, weddings, funerals, jubilees, and carefully managed appearances create a sense of shared national identity. But emotion has limits. When people begin to compare their own struggles with the hidden scale of royal comfort, sentiment turns into resentment. That is why the property empire must remain fragmented in the public mind. People know about Buckingham Palace because it feels like a national building. They accept Windsor Castle because it hosts state events. But few ever think about how many additional places exist beyond those symbols. The moment those properties are counted together, the story changes. It stops being about history and starts being about excess. The monarchy understands this instinctively. It does not need to hide individual buildings completely. It only needs to prevent the full picture from forming. As long as the public never sees the complete map, the danger for the monarchy is that secrecy becomes harder to maintain in a digital age. Information spreads quickly. Investigative journalists, independent researchers, and online creators now piece together what official reports leave out. What was once hidden behind tradition is now questioned through data, comparison, and context. Younger generations are less willing to accept "that's how it's always been" as an answer. They want justification. They want fairness. They want transparency. When they see a monarchy that still operates through inherited wealth, legal exemptions, and private arrangements shielded from scrutiny, the emotional contract weakens. Support for the monarchy no longer feels automatic. It becomes conditional. Conditional support is dangerous for an institution built on continuity. Once people begin asking whether the monarchy deserves its privileges, the next question follows naturally. What would Britain look like without them? That question would have been unthinkable a generation ago. Today, it is quietly forming beneath the surface. Prince William represents the future of this dilemma. He has carefully shaped an image of modern leadership. He speaks directly, avoids excess, and aligns himself with social causes that resonate with the public. But he cannot escape inheritance. When he becomes king, he will not only inherit a crown, he will inherit Sandringham, Balmoral, access to multiple palaces, control over duchy wealth. All the same structures that protect privilege today will protect his tomorrow. At that moment, image and reality will collide. Symbolic gestures will no longer be enough. Opening one garden or releasing one annual report will not satisfy demands for real transparency. The property empire will still exist, unchanged in scale, defended by tradition rather than logic. Reform would require painful choices: selling properties, opening estates fully, paying normal taxes, publishing complete financial accounts. These steps would modernize the monarchy, but they would also strip away mystique and reduce comfort. Institutions rarely choose self-reduction voluntarily. History suggests they protect themselves until pressure becomes unavoidable. That pressure is slowly building, not through scandal, but through comparison. Every year, people compare their shrinking opportunities with the monarchy's untouched advantages. Every year, the gap between public struggle and private privilege becomes harder to ignore. The monarchy does not fall because people hate it. It falls when people stop believing in it. Belief requires trust. Trust requires honesty. And honesty requires transparency. The royal family's property empire stands in the way of all three. It is too large to justify openly, and too powerful to dismantle quietly. Not because each estate is shameful, but because together they tell a story the monarchy cannot afford to tell. A story of inherited land, protected wealth, and a system designed for a world that no longer exists. If the monarchy is to survive in the 21st century, it must eventually face that story honestly. If it does not, the properties the Windsors don't want you to know about may become the very buy. The time Aristotle Onassis reached the height of his success, his name was known all over the world. He was no longer just a businessman. He had become a symbol of power, ambition, and luxury. His shipping empire controlled hundreds of massive oil tankers that moved fuel across oceans, connecting countries and economies. Governments needed him, oil companies depended on him, and banks trusted him. Onassis had achieved what many only dream of: complete financial freedom. He owned private islands, luxury yachts, mansions in different countries, and airplanes that carried him wherever he wished. From the outside, his life looked perfect, almost unreal, like something out of a movie. But behind the gold and glamour, the reality was far more complex and emotionally heavy. Aristotle Onassis loved control. He believed that money was not just about comfort, but about power. He wanted to be in charge of every deal, every contract, and every decision. This mindset helped him succeed in business, but it slowly damaged his personal relationships. He trusted very few people, and even those close to him felt that he always kept a distance. Onassis believed that showing emotions was a weakness, especially in a world where rivals were always waiting for a mistake. As a result, he built walls around himself, walls made of wealth, authority, and silence. One of the most talked about parts of Onassis's life was his relationship with famous and powerful women. He was often seen with actresses, royalty, and social elites. These relationships increased his public image and made headlines, but they also showed his deep desire for recognition and admiration. Perhaps no relationship brought him more global attention than his connection to Jacqueline Kennedy, the widow of U.S. President John F. Kennedy. When Onassis married Jacqueline in 1968, the world was shocked. For some, it was a union of two powerful worlds, American political royalty and Greek financial dominance. For others, it was controversial and confusing. Jacqueline Kennedy married Onassis seeking safety and stability after years of public tragedy. Onassis, on the other hand, gained international prestige and media attention through the marriage. However, despite their wealth and status, the marriage was never truly happy. They lived separate lives, often in different countries, and shared little emotional closeness. Their relationship showed a painful truth. Money can provide protection, but it cannot heal emotional wounds or create genuine connection. While the world focused on Onassis's glamorous lifestyle, problems were quietly growing within his family. His son, Alexander Onassis, was supposed to inherit the empire and continue the family legacy. Aristotle loved his son deeply, but struggled to express it openly. Alexander grew up surrounded by wealth, but lacked emotional warmth and guidance. He felt pressure to live up to his father's massive success, while trying to find his own identity. This pressure slowly turned into emotional stress, confusion, and sadness. Alexander Onassis was intelligent and sensitive, but he lived in the shadow of a giant. No matter what he achieved, it never felt like enough. He worked in the family business, but felt controlled rather than trusted. Aristotle wanted to protect the empire, but in doing so, he often limited his son's freedom. This created distance between them, a distance that money could not fix. The lack of open communication and emotional support would later prove to be devastating. At the same time, Aristotle Onassis began facing challenges in his business empire. Global politics were changing. Governments started placing restrictions on shipping. Oil markets became unstable, and new competitors entered the scene. Although Onassis was still extremely wealthy, the era where he could dominate without resistance was coming to an end. These challenges frustrated him deeply. For a man used to winning, any loss felt personal. His health also started to decline, adding another layer of struggle to his life. Despite all his achievements, Onassis began to feel lonely. His friendships were often based on business, not trust. Many people around him admired his money, not his personality. As he grew older, he started realizing that he had sacrificed emotional closeness for success. The island of Scorpios, once a symbol of luxury and celebration, slowly became a place of reflection and sadness. The parties became fewer, the laughter quieter, and the joy more distant. The greatest tragedy of Aristotle Onassis's life came in 1973, when his son Alexander died in a plane crash at the age of just 24. This moment shattered him completely. No business loss, no political battle, and no public criticism had ever hurt him this deeply. Alexander's death destroyed the future Onassis had imagined for his empire and his family. For the first time, the most powerful shipping tycoon in the world felt truly helpless. After Alexander's death, Aristotle Onassis changed. He withdrew from public life and lost interest in business. The man who once negotiated fearlessly with governments now struggled to get out of bed. His health deteriorated rapidly, and his spirit was broken. He often said that money had failed him, that it could buy anything except time and life. The empire he had built with such determination suddenly felt meaningless without his son to inherit it. This phase of Onassis's life reveals the most important lesson of his story. Wealth can create opportunities, comfort, and power, but it cannot replace human connection. Aristotle Onassis achieved everything the world promised success would bring, yet in the end, he was left with regret and loss. His journey shows that ambition without balance can lead to emotional emptiness. The man who conquered oceans could not protect his own family from tragedy. Paragraph 5 marks the emotional turning point of the Onassis family story. It is where success begins to collapse under the weight of personal loss. From this moment onward, the focus shifts from power and expansion to grief, regret, and the slow decline of a once unstoppable dynasty. The story no longer asks how much money one man can make, but how much pain one heart can endure. After the death of his son Alexander, Aristotle Onassis was never the same man again. The strong, confident tycoon who once ruled the seas with bold decisions now moved slowly, both in body and spirit. His energy disappeared, and his passion for business faded. For years, Onassis had believed that success could solve every problem. But Alexander's death proved him wrong. It showed him a painful truth. Even the richest man in the world is powerless against fate. From this moment onward, his life became quieter, darker, and filled with regret. Onassis tried to return to work, but his heart was no longer in it. Meetings that once excited him now felt empty. Contracts that would have thrilled him years earlier no longer mattered. He spent long hours alone, often thinking about his son, and replaying memories from the past. People around him noticed the change. His voice lost its strength, his posture bent, and his sharp mind became clouded with sadness. The empire still existed, but the man who built it was slowly fading away. His marriage to Jacqueline Kennedy also grew colder during this time. They were already living mostly separate lives, but after Alexander's death, the emotional distance between them became impossible to ignore. Jacqueline preferred to stay in New York or Paris, while Onassis spent more time on his island of Scorpios or in quiet hospitals. Their relationship had been built on security and status, not deep emotional understanding, and now it could not survive the weight of grief. In 1975, their marriage effectively ended, leaving Onassis even more alone. As his health declined, Onassis was diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, a serious illness that weakened his muscles and drained his strength. Simple tasks became difficult. Traveling, once his greatest joy, turned into a painful effort. The man who owned private jets and luxury yachts could barely walk without assistance. This physical decline mirrored his emotional state. His body, like his empire, was no longer under his full control. With his son gone, the question of inheritance became complicated. Onassis had always planned for Alexander to take over everything. Now, that future was gone. His daughter, Christina Onassis, was the only direct heir left. Christina had grown up in a world of extreme wealth but deep emotional instability. She struggled with personal relationships, trust issues, and a sense of loneliness. Although she inherited enormous wealth, She was never truly prepared to manage the emotional and psychological burden that came with it. Aristotle worried about Christina, but he did not know how to help her. Like his relationship with Alexander, communication between father and daughter was limited. Onassis expressed love through money, gifts, and protection, but rarely through open conversation or emotional support. Christina felt trapped by her family name, expected to carry a legacy she never chose. This emotional distance would later play a tragic role in her life. In March 1975, Aristotle Onassis died in Paris at the age of 69. His death marked the end of an era. The world mourned the loss of one of the greatest businessmen of the 20th century. Newspapers praised his intelligence, ambition, and influence, but those who truly knew him understood that his final years were filled with pain rather than pride. He died a broken man, not because he lost money, but because he lost the people who mattered most. After his death, Christina Onassis inherited the vast fortune. She became one of the richest women in the world overnight. Ships, properties, bank accounts, and investments now belonged to her. But wealth did not bring her happiness. Christina struggled with depression, failed marriages, and health problems. She searched for love and stability, but often found disappointment. The same wealth that gave her freedom also isolated her, making it difficult to trust anyone's intentions. Christina married 4 times, each relationship ending in heartbreak. She desperately wanted a normal life, but the shadow of the Onassis name followed her everywhere. People saw her wealth before they saw her as a person. This constant pressure led to emotional exhaustion. Although she tried to manage the business empire, her heart was never in it. The shipping world, once dominated by her father, began to slowly decline under changing global conditions and lack of passionate leadership. In 1988, Christina Onassis died suddenly at the age of 37. Officially, her death was ruled as a heart attack, but many believe her lifestyle and emotional struggles played a role. Her death shocked the world and confirmed the tragic pattern of the Onassis family. Within one generation, unimaginable wealth had failed to protect its heirs from pain, loneliness, and early death. Christina's daughter, Athena Onassis, became the last heir of the legendary dynasty. Still a child at the time, Athena inherited a reduced but still massive fortune. Unlike her mother and grandfather, she was raised away from the spotlight in an attempt to give her a normal life. The Onassis Empire, once a symbol of unstoppable ambition, now existed mostly as history rather than power. Paragraph 6 shows the slow collapse of a dynasty that once ruled global shipping. It proves that money can build empires, but it cannot build emotional strength or guarantee happiness. The Onassis story is not just about success. It is about the hidden cost of ambition. As the family's wealth passed from one generation to the next, the emotional wounds grew deeper, leaving behind a powerful lesson for the world. With the deaths of Aristotle Onassis, his son Alexander, and later his daughter Christina, the once mighty Onassis dynasty had almost completely faded into silence. What remained was not the loud power of shipping empires or the glamour of private islands, but a quiet legacy filled with lessons, unanswered questions, and deep emotional scars. The name Onassis, once spoken with awe and fear in boardrooms and governments, now carried a different meaning, a reminder that wealth alone cannot protect a family from tragedy. The final heir of this legendary family was Athena Onassis, Christina's only daughter. She was just a child when her mother died, suddenly inheriting a fortune that once ruled oceans. Unlike her grandfather, Athena did not grow up dreaming of power or control. Instead, her guardians tried to protect her from the destructive spotlight that had damaged previous generations. She was raised mostly away from public attention, far from the ships, deals, and drama that defined the Onassis name. Athena's upbringing was intentionally quiet. There were no grand interviews, no public speeches, and no attempts to revive the old empire. This silence was not weakness. Those responsible for her understood that the Onassis legacy was not just heavy because of money, but because of emotional pain passed down through generations. The goal was simple: give Athena something her family never had, a chance at a normal life. As Athena grew older, she slowly distanced herself from the shipping business. One by one, many of the Onassis ships were sold. The empire that once dominated global oil transportation was no longer a central force. The world had changed, and so had the family. Athena chose privacy over power, peace over prestige. In doing so, she quietly ended an era that had begun with ambition and ended with exhaustion. Today, the Onassis name still exists, but not as a ruling dynasty. Scorpios, the famous private island, where Aristotle once hosted kings, celebrities, and presidents, has been sold. The yachts no longer carry the same meaning. The mansions stand as memories, rather than symbols of dominance. What once looked eternal proved to be temporary. The story of the Onassis family forces us to ask an uncomfortable question. What is success, really? Aristotle Onassis achieved everything society praises: wealth, influence, respect, and global recognition. He started as a poor refugee and became one of the richest men in history. By every public standard, his life was a success. And yet, his personal world collapsed. His family suffered, his children died young, and his final years were filled with loneliness and regret. This does not mean ambition is wrong. Onassis's determination, intelligence, and courage remain inspiring. But his story shows the danger of imbalance. When success becomes everything, something important is often lost along the way. Emotional connection, family bonds, and inner peace cannot be delayed forever. They require time, attention, and vulnerability, things that money cannot replace. Alexander Onassis's death reminds us of the pressure placed on children born into powerful families. He did not choose the empire, yet he was expected to carry it. Christina Onassis's life shows how loneliness can exist even at the highest level of luxury. Athena's quiet retreat from the public eye shows wisdom learned through pain, a decision to break the cycle rather than repeat it. The Onassis dynasty teaches a powerful universal lesson. Wealth can create comfort, but it cannot create meaning. Meaning comes from relationships, purpose, and emotional honesty. When those are ignored, even the strongest empires can collapse from within. As this story comes to an end, the image of Aristotle Onassis standing on the deck of his yacht feels different. No longer a symbol of power, but of reflection. A man who conquered oceans, but could not control fate. A man who proved that success without balance comes at a high price. The Onassis story is not just history, it is a mirror. It reflects our own dreams, our hunger for success, and the risks we take in chasing it. It asks us to consider what truly matters before time makes the decision for us. And so, the final chapter of the Onassis dynasty closes not with noise, but with silence. Not with victory, but with understanding. The ships are gone, the deals are finished, and the spotlight has faded. What remains is a lesson written not in gold, but in human experience. Because in the end, the greatest legacy is not what we own, but what we leave behind in the hearts of those we love.